Imagine spending 30, 40, maybe even 50 years of your life feeling like you were just slightly out of step with everyone around you. Like everyone else got this manual or memo that you somehow just never received. You've been exhausted in ways you cannot explain. You've struggled in places that seemed easy for other people. You've wondered privately, what is wrong with me? And then one day, maybe at 34, 47, maybe even at 62, someone hands you a piece of paper that says you're autistic. And you don't know whether to feel relieved, seen, devastated, angry, or any combination thereof. And if that's you, or if you love someone who's been there, this video is for you. Hi, my name is Dr. Colleen Serra. I'm an ADHD psychologist and mom who combines research and lived experience to help you see, support, and celebrate every kind of mind. Okay, now let's get into this. Today, I want to talk to you about something that doesn't get nearly enough airtime during Autism Awareness Month. What it means to receive an autism diagnosis as an adult. Why so many people are getting diagnosed late, what that experience is actually like, and what it can open up for you when you finally have the framework that helps you understand so much about your life and who you are. I want to start with a metaphor because I think it captures something really important. Before we had telescopes powerful enough to see distant stars, those stars still existed. They were there the whole time. We just didn't have the instrument to see them. And when we finally built a telescope that could, we didn't say the stars just magically appeared. We said, oh, wow, they were here all along. We just couldn't see them yet. And that's what a late autism diagnosis is, right? You didn't become autistic when someone handed you that incredibly important piece of paper. You were autistic your entire life. Your nervous system, your sensory experiences, the way that you processed and interacted with the world, that was always yours. The diagnosis is simply the instrument that finally let you see yourself clearly, and what a gift that is. But nothing about you has changed. Only the lens with which you view yourself has. Okay, so why were so many people missed, right? So many people are getting diagnosed now in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, and beyond. And this is not an accident or even all that surprising. And it's not because they weren't autistic enough not to be noticed. It's because the systems were built to identify autism on a very narrow picture of what autism looked like, okay? So for decades, autism research was conducted almost exclusively on young white boys who had significant support needs and little to no masking ability. That became like the template, the blueprint, right? That became what clinicians were trained to look for, what we were all trained to look for. And if you didn't match that template, if you were a little girl, a woman, AFAB person, a person of color, someone who has learned to perform neurotypicality with remarkable skill, you were invisible to that system. Right? And then there's masking, which is a whole other thing. Masking is when autistic people learn, often from a very young age, and often without ever consciously deciding to do it, but they learn how to camouflage their autistic traits in order to fit in, avoid negative consequences, or simply survive in environments that weren't built for them. They watch other people carefully. They script conversations before they happen. They suppress their stimming. I'm doing this under here. They perform social ease that costs them enormous amounts of energy. And because they're so good at it, the people around them, including clinicians, often don't see the effort behind the performance. They see someone who seems just fine, who's coping, who's maybe a little quirky or anxious or intense, but nothing that would raise a diagnostic flag. The person doing the masking, meanwhile, is exhausted. Many late diagnosed people were also misdiagnosed first, sometimes with anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, sometimes personality disorders like borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder, or just ADHD. which is not to say the other diagnoses were always wrong. Autistic people do experience anxiety and depression at much higher rates than the general population, often as a result of years of not understanding themselves and navigating a world that wasn't built for them. But when those are the only diagnoses that someone receives, the underlying neurotype goes unaddressed. And then they keep wondering why the standard treatments don't work. So what happens when someone finally gets that diagnosis as an adult? I want to be honest with you here because that experience is rarely simple. For many people, the first thing they feel is relief, sometimes profound relief. A lifetime of confusion suddenly has context. The exhaustion makes sense. The social struggles make sense. The sensory overwhelm, the meltdowns they learned to hide, the way they needed so much more recovery time than everyone else, it all finally makes sense. There's a name for it now. And that naming can feel like being handed yourself. But relief is also rarely the only thing. There's often a lot of other conflicting emotions, like grief. Grief for the younger version of yourself who didn't have this information, who was told that they were too sensitive, too intense, too much, or not enough, who spent years trying to fix something that didn't need to be fixed, just understood, who might have made different choices about careers, relationships, environments, if only they had known. There can also be anger at the systems that missed you, at the clinicians who dismissed you, at a culture that has spent decades telling you that the way your brain worked was a problem to be solved. There's often a lot of underlying rage that needs to be worked through. And for some people, there's also disorientation, a kind of identity vertigo where the story you've been telling about yourself, about who you are, suddenly has to be completely rewritten. And that can be really unsettling, even when the rewrite is ultimately a better, truer version of the story. All of this to say, however you feel is normal. All of it makes sense. And most of the people that I've worked with move through all of it, not in a clean or linear way, but over time and towards something that feels more like an integration of this into your current identity. It feels more like coming home to yourself. So in this next section, I want to address what a diagnosis doesn't fix and why that's even the wrong question to begin with, okay? So this is something I hear a lot, especially from people who are newly diagnosed or considering pursuing a diagnosis. And it usually sounds something like, but what actually changes? Like nothing about my life changes, nothing about me changes. Like it doesn't fix anything. You can't medicate autism, right? And I want to sit with one word for a second, which is fix. We are so steeped in medical model thinking, the idea that a diagnosis exists for the purpose of identifying what's wrong so we can repair or eliminate it, that many of us apply that framework automatically, reflexively, even to ourselves. We assume that if the diagnosis doesn't come with a cure, then what's the point? I want to offer an alternative. The neurodiversity paradigm offers us something different. It tells us that autistic people and ADHD people and all neurodivergent people are not broken versions of a neurotypical standard. They are part of the natural diversity of the human species. The goal was never to fix you. It should be to understand you. So no, a diagnosis doesn't fix you because you were never broken. What a diagnosis does do is it kicks open a door. And it's up to you whether you want to walk through it or not. But here's what I believe with everything I have. Without self-awareness, we cannot understand ourselves, right? And without understanding ourselves, we cannot accept ourselves. And without acceptance, how can we love ourselves? The diagnosis isn't a destination. It's the beginning of a much more honest relationship with who you actually are. Okay, so what does walking through that door actually look like in practice? Because I don't want this to stay in the abstract. So, for a lot of people, integrating this diagnosis leads to some very concrete, meaningful changes. Some people finally feel permission to say no to social events that have been draining them for years. Not because they're antisocial or rude, but because now they understand that social interaction genuinely costs their nervous system more than it costs many of their neurotypical peers. And that protecting their social energy is not selfishness, it's self knowledge. Some people restructure their days and schedules in ways that actually work for their brains. Now, that's not available for everyone, but for the people it is, it's worth considering. Maybe this means building in more transition time between activities. Maybe it means protecting certain hours for deep work and letting go of the expectation that they should be available and on all day long. Maybe it means naming sensory needs that they've been quietly managing on their own or quietly suffering through for their entire lives. Some people decide they need a different job entirely. And while many of them had quietly known this for a long time, had felt the chronic mismatch between who they are and what their environment was asking of them, the diagnosis gives them something they couldn't quite access before: permission. The internal authority to say, this is not a character flaw, this is a genuine incompatibility, and I am allowed to pursue something that actually fits with who I am. Some people begin unmasking slowly, carefully, in spaces where it feels safe, and discover that they're less exhausted, that they have more capacity than they ever dreamed of, that some of the anxiety that they've been carrying for years starts to lift. So when they stop spending so much energy performing a version of themselves that was never quite real. None of this happens overnight. And none of it happens without intention, and none of that is simple. But it is possible, and it starts with knowing. So, if you're somewhere in this story, if you were recently diagnosed, if you're wondering whether to pursue a diagnosis, if you're a parent watching your child and recognizing pieces of yourself in them, I want you to know you are not alone. And I want you to know that the confusion, the grief, the relief, the fear, the anger, the worry, all parts are a part of a process that can lead somewhere in a really meaningful way. If you want support as you walk through that door, I want to invite you to check out the Healing Haven, my online membership community built specifically for neurodivergent adults and parents of neurodivergent kids. Inside, you'll find education, community, and the kind of identity-affirming support that I wish everyone had access to a lot sooner. The link is in the description below. And if this video resonated with you in any way, please share it. Please let someone know about this channel, because there are people in your life who are still waiting to see their stars. And they deserve to know the telescope exists. I'll see you next week.